And we will go ahead and begin today's webinar. Again, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining today's webinar, Averted School Violence, Strategies for Prevention, Response, and Recovery from Acts of Violence in Schools. My name is William Moore, and I'm with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And as your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be published on OJJDP's YouTube page. The webinar recording will be archived in approximately 1 week on OJJDP's NTTAC YouTube channel, where you can also view past webinars. And for the event transcript and supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP NTTAC Help Desk. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you may do so by locating the handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here, you will also find a FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address technical related questions. Click on the name of the file and then click the download button. And again, this pod is located directly above the chat pod there. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenters will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your question into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute to help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. Again, if you're viewing alone, there's no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. And I'll give you guys just a couple of minutes to go ahead and provide that for us. Thank you. Following today's webinar, attendees will be sent, at the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be provided a link to a brief survey about today's presentation. The feedback you provide will be used to assist in future planning and training. And following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. The certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via Adobe Connect. Thank you email. Please keep an eye out for this email and for the certificate at the end of today's webinar. And I wanted to check to see if Elizabeth Wolf has joined us for today's webinar for our welcome. Okay. We may have missed Elizabeth, but no worries. We will just go ahead and continue with the webinar. So again, thank you all. And with our colleagues with Police Foundation, we will begin today's webinar. Thank you all for joining. And I'd like to turn over the webinar, I believe, to Sarah to Dean to provide us with an introduction and our remarks. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Good afternoon. As a senior counselor of the Police Foundation in Washington, D.C., I'm grateful to all of you taking this hour to hear this conversation, which we feel so important. The Justice Department has, through the COPS Office of the National Institute of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, has been able to fund this project for us the last 2 years. We're grateful for them as well as their technical assistance today. So we're here to talk about something that has become what seems to be a weekly conversation in our country now, the loss of American children in schools, and what we can do about it, and what we can do to prevent it, and what lessons we can learn from one another. We have a great panel here today, all of whom we know each other and have been working together. I'd like to acknowledge each of them and then let them get going. Canady, formerly police officer, now the executive director of NASRO, the National Association of School Resource Officers. Michelle Gay, co-founder and executive director of Safe and Sound Schools. Chief Mike Kehoe, the former chief of police of Newtown, Connecticut Police Department. Good to see you again, Chief.
Good to see you.
And my colleague, Chief Frank Straub, retired, the Director of Strategic Studies at the National Police Foundation. I'm not going to spend much time on the introduction. I'm just going to bring it to everyone's attention again that we are losing American children, whether it is in Florida or Connecticut, whether it's Texas or whether it was in Colorado in 1999. These events are becoming more rapid and more frequent. But there are just as many stories of averted incidents. In fact, there are more. And I believe in the power of storytelling. I think we all do. And believe in the power of data and analysis. And with that, I'll turn it over to our first presenter. So thank you for this hour of paying attention, and we'll be paying attention to you as well. Thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Good. I say good morning because I know some of our people who are online with us are from actually the West Coast and beyond. I saw somebody from Honolulu, Hawaii, so we welcome everybody who's here today. There's well over 400 people attendees with this, and I appreciate that kind of response because, as Chief Esterman said, this is an important webinar that certainly can make a difference if indeed tragedy should befall your school district. So I thought I would start with this morning and this afternoon about lessons learned, and I thought about 4 Ps and the preparation, the plan, the partnerships, and the predictability of this whole subject matter. And essentially we can add another P, which is prevention, because I think that's the key. If we can prevent these things from happening, we'll have to talk about them so often. Well, as Chief Esterman said, they're happening at all too frequent pace. So when we talk about preparation, we're talking about, no doubt about it, the hardening of our school security protocols and our assets, and of course our policies and procedures. Those school safety plans that we all have, the emergency operation plans that we all have. We need to try to build and enhance our community understanding of what our goals are. Our goals are to keep children safe, let them learn the way they should be learning. We do that through, obviously, our plans, our planning, the establishment of those goals and those policies and procedures for the community and the school district and first responders and others. We know a key part of that would be all of our school staff and certainly SROs and our security staff in the school system, in the school districts. We know that to be truly preventative, and certainly if you should have, again, and if you have to recover, our partnerships are going to be key. Those active participants, the cooperation that you get from your community partners, your key persons in the community, those resources that you already have relationships with. When we join together in common goals to the benefit of all, we know we can make mountains move, and we can make a difference in certainly our lives and in our communities. And finally, the last P, predictability. It should be really unpredictability, because it's very hard to foretell with scientific reasoning, that a threat is present or going to happen to your school district. We know that. Before Sandy Hook, I guess many could not reason an attack in an elementary school. I know I would have a hard time reasoning that. So these events become more unprecedented as we move on in the days and weeks after each such tragedy occurs in a community. If we could predict future behavior, certainly we could probably prevent these kinds of tragedies from occurring. And as I did my research on this, I looked at a list of school shootings. Just do a Wikipedia search, you'd be surprised what you find in there. You find that they start in 1840s. That's how far they've gone back through open source reporting to determine how many school shootings. And I want to just go further with that. And you don't have to have guns being a part of the violence in schools. We certainly have other weapons. We know that bombs have been used, and we know that even machetes and knives and other types of weapons have been used when it comes to violence in school. So the lessons, at least we learned from many of these. Again, these are not an all-inclusive list, but we know that common denominators are, okay, very simply a weapon, a school, and a person with a weapon. That becomes the common denominators, and each profile or potential perpetrator will change as you go from case to case. In the Sandy Hook shooter situation, we knew that he was a loner, he was a gamer, he had reports of comprehensive review and a spreadsheet of score sheet of previous mass casualty events. He was somewhat socially, emotionally challenged or antisocial at times, at least that's what the quote was. He was certainly preoccupied with violence. Researched extensively other mass murders, including the 2011 Norway shooting. And that spreadsheet told a great deal, according to the papers, about his thinking well before the event occurred. And we know that a lot of these people who commit these violent acts have involvement with mental health providers and systems well in advance of the event that really brought them to the forefront. They sometimes show some attachment, isolation, and sometimes an emotional disconnect from society. And oftentimes, the mother's relationships or parental relationships are in conflict, where mom and dad or even brother and sister they're disconnected in some way, and they're at odds. No doubt we can learn a lot from and a great deal from mass casualty events. At the same time as I think this subject matter brings to bear, we can learn a lot from those near misses too. So it's important that we get those reporting as often as we can, so we can determine what was the key in discovering possible events. And we know there's a lot of possible events that could have occurred that have been thwarted. And that's where I think we need to understand that we need to train all of our personnel to look for those suspicious behaviors, to report up and share information with the partners that we already have, whether it be law enforcement. I know there's a lot of SROs on today's webinar, or school safety personnel, and certainly school personnel. If you should be unfortunate and have a community or school district have an event like this, the lessons we learned from in Sandy Hook, crisis response plan was so important. Your emergency operation plans became critical in maneuvering through the many things that you're going to find. Those short-term and long-term operational planning needs and plans and needs are going to be taxed. Take them seriously, understand them, understand what could happen. There's a lot of materials out there now. Their playbook and aftermath management, which includes family management, reunification strategies, crisis management importance, managing fear risks, help aftermath services, and managing your community and your districts. There's so much out there today because of unfortunately the plethora of the mass casualty events and violence in schools. And if you can take it seriously, think about training for mass casualties, using the ICS and the Incident Command System, and the NIMS, the National Incident Management System. They guide you at all levels to work together to protect and prevent these kinds of matters. And at the end of all of this, you have to recognize there's a mental health phenomenon where people are going to be affected differently, and we could probably do a whole webinar just on that alone, but there is a mental health phenomenon for this. But as we think about maneuvering through a critical incident like a violent event at a school, I would say that it's difficult to build those new relationships in the midst of the chaos that may occur with a critical event. You need to have done that well in advance. That's part of your planning. That's part of your prevention. And if you haven't done that, it's going to be very difficult. Your job will be whatever your job is going to be more challenging. We know that many of the people who are working with children in school are creative, they're talented, they're dedicated people. But by developing partnerships and relationships with private sector and your community sector, okay, there's no doubt about it. You're gonna be able to maneuver through these challenging events that will come. And certainly local, state, and federal relationship and partnerships are important. I know in Newtown it was very critical that I knew so many people way in advance. I knew that our school staff knew many people way in advance. Our school district knew many people. Our community did. We had already leveraged, many of these very important partnerships. And the only way you're going to be able to learn more about them and develop a trusted relationship is you train with them, and train with them as often as you can. And I think that's very, very important. And as part of that training, you want to be realistic, you want to be repetitive, so that your responses are somewhat similar. We need to know what's expected of everybody. The success at responding and recovery is going to be certainly based upon not operating on the fly. It's because you have trained, you know what your responsibilities are, and you're going to be able to handle that. And as part of that, interoperable and seamless communication seems to be very, very important, whether it be through radio or certainly other ways of communication. And if you have a consistent response, everybody know what the realistic expectations are. And unfortunately, you're going to need to be prepared for maybe horrific injuries, especially in a mass casualty event. As we close, and recap just a few thoughts about the 4 Ps and really the 5 Ps of planning, preparing, predicting, and partnering so we can avert or prevent. Let's recap that the predictability is really not there. Human behaviors cannot dictate what you may face. As much as we try to think that we have enough safety nets within our systems, that you are trying to understand that it may not, all that work may not prevent a critical incident happening in your school district or in your community. And it doesn't matter whether you're small or large at all. In the Amish-Lancaster County incident was in a one-room school. You can imagine what would have happened then. And there's so many unknowns versus the unknowns. And I think that, we have so many to talk about that we don't have enough time today. But I would say that a determined mindset is hard to overcome or thwart, but preparation will help you with that. It will also determine success if you have planning capabilities and preparation behind you. And remember that one of those common denominators, again, is that these people act because of the access and availability of captive and vulnerable victims, and that's unfortunate. But I think that that is one of those denominators that if we think about, we'll know how important this subject matter is for everybody today. So I thank you for the time that you gave me this morning and this afternoon.
Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Well, thanks, Chief Kehoe, for laying down the foundation for today's presentation and sharing so many of our lessons learned. It's good to see you again. And I'm Michelle Gay. I'm co-founder and executive director of Safe and Sound School. And I'm going to welcome all of you to connect with us at Safe and Sound School. See if I can get the slides going here. You know, after this presentation, our time is short, of course, today, and we've got a lot to cover. So if there's anything that you would like more information about, want to learn more about, please do reach back to us via any of these channels. I'm here with you today in many ways because of what my family and my community suffered on December 14th, 2012 in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. We lost our youngest daughter, Josephine, that day in the attack on Sandy Hook School. It'll be 12 years, it'll be 6 years since this December 12th, since the tragedy. And although we miss her every day, we find more and more that she really has never left us. In fact, Josephine's very much a part of my work at Safe and Sound Schools. Months after the tragedy, I joined another mom, Alyssa Parker, in founding Safe and Sound in honor of our daughters. They were and continue to be really positive forces in the world. They brought people together. And so we chose in their honor to do the same. At Safe and Sound Schools, we bring parents, teachers, professionals, community leaders together all around something that we agree on, and that is the safety of our schools and communities. Our mission is to provide the education, tools, resources, and programs that every community needs to support crisis prevention, response, and recovery, and really ultimately protecting the safety of every child and every school. And we're guided by the framework that we've created to help communities that are organized, access, and develop their own resources to ensure a truly comprehensive approach to school safety. As you can see, there's a lot to consider. It's big. We actually call it the Big Six internally at Safe and Sound, but it's our aim to help communities bring it all together to ensure safety from prevention through recovery. And we do that by making sure that there are robust mental and behavioral health resources, such as school-based mental health professionals and threat assessment and management infrastructure. Making sure that we have health and wellness programs and policies that cover everything from concussion protocols through stress management. Attention to the physical environment as well, creating and enhancing our buildings and our campuses to provide naturally preventative, protective, supportive learning environments. Fostering culture, climate, and community that engages everyone, involves every member in a truly safe and sound community. And we do that through things like social emotional learning, programming, and community education. As well, making sure that there's a strong understanding of the rules and regulations, you know, the laws and policies that support safety, like ADA compliance, fire codes, life safety, special education law, and the budgeting and funding that it takes to sustain a truly balanced and comprehensive approach to safety. Of course, the cornerstone of solid prevention, response, and recovery in many ways lies in operations and emergency management, some of those principles that we rely on our emergency managers, law enforcement, fire professionals. They help us cover everything from transportation to reunification. So it's a lot. It's a lot to ask our schools and communities to consider. And you may be wondering, you know, how am I going to do this, or how is any school community tending to all of these areas? And the answer is simple. It's not easy. It is simple, though. They're doing it together. Over the past 5 years, we visited over 2,000 school communities, and it's clear to us that communities that find ways to do this work together have the most well-developed plans and infrastructure built around safety. They do it together, and they do it continually. One of the ways that we aim to support this process in communities across the country is through providing best practice guidance, education, and training. We offer individual visits and trainings as well as regional and national summits. There's one coming up for us in Houston in March, so you can keep an eye out for information there. We'll be blasting that on all of our social channels as well, of course, on our website, to look out for that. These summits, they bring our national experts and partners like NASRO and the Police Foundation together with local experts and stakeholders to network and share resources and best practices. As well, we offer a lot of programs and resources. So we will continue to release those. In fact, this year we'll release quite a few more new programs and resources. Really excited about the threat assessment work that we're doing. We received a grant from a wonderful corporation called Report It, who specializes in helping communities to report threats and concerns in the community. So we're looking forward to putting that grant to good use in developing threat assessment materials and resources with our expert team. As well, all of our programs and resources at Safe and Sound Schools are available to schools and school communities at no cost. So you can get right on the website and you can download programs and share them in your community. In the interest of time, I'll highlight just a couple here. This is one of my favorites. It's our Safe and Sound Youth Council program. We launched it officially around this time last year. It took a lot of years of hard work, but I'm really proud to give most of the credit to the young people, the middle schoolers and high schoolers that reached out to us, really pushing us to get this going and launch it officially. This program is a school-based, student-led program whereby students get to take a seat at the table, get to be leaders, get to serve their communities by completing annual community service projects devoted to safety. It's a great way for our youth to become educated in safety, to learn leadership skills, and to connect as well with school resource officers, the education leaders, the folks that really can connect them and help them learn more as well as have a greater impact in the community. Another program that we're really excited about is our State of School Safety Survey and Report. We launched that last spring, and we were honestly just hoping that we would get maybe 400 folks to participate so we could get some decent information and perhaps note some patterns that we could report on, some solid findings. What happened though is we had almost 3,000 participants from all of our different stakeholder groups, parents, teachers, safety professionals, fire, police, everybody participated and in good numbers. So we discovered some really important patterns, and most importantly, I think got conversations started in a lot of the communities that we serve and others that didn't necessarily know about us yet. I think one of the most exciting things for me with this report and this kind of stepping into this new area for us, doing some sort of light research, is the opportunity for partnerships with the Police Foundation for one, who will help guide us in the coming year as we release this survey and report, so that we can build it and continue to grow this program. I can't overstate how critically important it is that our work in prevention, response, and recovery is founded in solid, trusted information and resources. As we've seen nationally, without it, it's just far too easy for conversations to become arguments and emotion to override the kind of critical thinking and problem solving that it's going to take to keep our schools safe. That'll always be our focus at Safe and Sound Schools, and we're very proud to work with some of the folks that are on this webinar here today, great partners with us in the field of safety. I encourage you all to visit us at safeandsoundschools.org to learn a little bit more about us and keep an eye on us as we grow. We're constantly adding to our programs and offerings, and that's in thanks in large part to the great people that we work with. One of those folks is Canady, Executive Director of NASRO, the National Association of School Resource Officers. Mo and NASRO are among some of the great friends and partners of ours at Safe and Sound Schools. So I'm really pleased to hand the presentation off to Mo now to continue. Thanks, everybody.
And Mo, just a reminder to begin your webcam. and also make sure that you are currently not on mute. Thanks, Mo.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. William, there does seem to be a little bit of an issue with the slides being up. I don't see the slides below the video.
Okay, let's see. I'll go ahead and investigate this, but Mo, if you want to continue your presentation, we'll go ahead and troubleshoot this in the background.
All right, very good. Well, good afternoon and good morning. It's nice to see that we have a lot of attendees from all the way from Florida to Massachusetts to Alaska to Hawaii. And so, again, as everyone has said, good morning and good afternoon. It really is an honor to be on this webinar along with Chief Kehoe and of course along with Michelle Gay, who has certainly become a great friend of ours. And so we really appreciate the work that Michelle and her wonderful organization are doing. So I'm going to move forward without the slides because a lot of these things I talk about on a regular basis. I was watching to see who all was joining the webinar, and it's clear to me that a lot of SROs are on the webinar, and also you know, I'm assuming that there are probably some school administrators on board, hopefully some chiefs and sheriffs, law enforcement administration folks. For the SROs, my message is going to be simple, and many of you know it. You know, the bottom line is that SROs can and have made a significant difference in our schools for years. But of course, over the last few months, especially the last part of this past school year, we saw that play out in a big way where SROs really stepped up at the plate and did what had to be done in order to save lives. And we actually had the opportunity to honor a couple of those SROs at our national conference back in June in Reno, Nevada. One of the things I always lead with, and it is that regardless of who the audience is, it's important for us to always be able to make sure we're understanding the definition of an SRO. And I don't ever take that for granted. I don't ever put myself in a situation where I think everyone I'm talking to knows what an SRO is. I've made that mistake before, and so what I have begun to lead with in just about every conversation I have is making sure everyone knows. So there is a federal definition, and it looks like the slides are back up, and you see that here. And there's three important parts of this definition. An SRO is a sworn certified law enforcement officer. That's thing number one in the definition. You can all see it right there. And so this came about a few years ago in terms of my realization that I need to be sharing this on a regular basis. When I was getting some media calls after one of the school shootings a few years ago, and one day the question kept being asked, should SROs be armed? And that was very disturbing to me that someone would ask that question, because I was naive enough to think that, well, everyone understands what an SRO is. I figured out they didn't. So I went and grabbed the federal definition, and I started sharing that with the media members. And once I shared that information and said, you know, first of all, they have to be a sworn certified law enforcement officer, then there was the realization, for the most part, that yes, they should be armed. The second thing you see in there is that it needs to be community-based policing or community-oriented policing. If that's not the approach, we're probably going to fail in our mission. We've got to have a community-oriented policing approach in a school environment. You know, this really is a collision, in a sense, of bringing law enforcement and education together. So we have to have a really good plan for that, and part of that has to be community-oriented policing. And then finally, within the definition, the issue of collaboration. There has to be proper collaboration between law enforcement and school districts, and that has to be put into play from the very beginning. So we know that it has to be a sworn certified law enforcement officer, but also an SRO has to be carefully selected. And when I served as the lieutenant of our SRO program, it was the most critical thing that I did at any point was to select SROs to go into our schools. And I'm proud to say that I got it right more often than I got it wrong. Maybe I was just lucky, but there were a couple of times I got it wrong. And that was a very painful thing because it's a reflection on the entire department. And so it's important that we get that right. And then they've got to be specially trained, specifically trained to work in a school environment. And for those law enforcement administrators and school administrators that are listening today, this is critical. We can't just put officers into a school environment without giving them the tools that they need to be successful. And just the academy training they receive at the beginning of their career is not it. That's not enough. So we've got to make sure that they are specially trained to work in this environment. One of the things we do at NASRO is our training is based on the triad concept, the SRO triad concept, which trains the officer about their role from a law enforcement standpoint, certainly, which also involves the school safety piece, but also as an informal counselor. Law enforcement officers out there, we do a lot of informal counseling out on the road when we're patrol officers or even as investigators or any other assignment. So we can bring that toolbox into the school environment and really be effective with students as we build relationships and help them with issues. And then the other side of the triad you see there is education. SROs can be really, really effective when they get into the classroom environment and really present a diverse curriculum in law-related education. The number one goal of any SRO should be to bridge the gap between law enforcement and youth. There have been many more instances of SROs stopping an act of violence before a round is ever fired or a gun's ever brought into the building through relationships. When we have good, solid relationships with students and also with staff and with parents, we're going to get valuable intelligence. We're going to get some great information through those relationships that can help us stop an act of violence before it ever happens. And we also want to be about increasing positive attitudes between law enforcement and youth. So what are some of the roles? The idea of them being a visible, active law enforcement figure, very, very important. They are the ultimate first responder. SROs listening out there, thank you so much. You are the ultimate first responder in these school violence and school shooting cases. But we can also be a classroom resource, a community resource, and a positive role model. And for SROs, we get held to a higher standard, whether we want to be or not. The bottom line is SROs become the most well-known officer in their department. So from January 1 to the end of the traditional school year, we averaged a little more than one school shooting a week. That's pretty frightening. So it was quite an uptick. And just to review a few of those, obviously Parkland seems to be the one that began the string of school shootings for the last part of the school year, where at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, 17 precious students lost their lives. And then we fast forward to Lexington Park, Maryland on March 20th. I'm very proud of and thankful for the work that SRO Deputy Blaine Gaskell did there, where he responded to the gunfire as well-trained SROs are prone to do, and stopped it. There's no telling how many lives he saved by his action. Ocala, Florida on April 20th, SRO Jimmy Long did a fantastic job of stopping that school shooting, getting the shooter in custody. And so very proud of the work that he did there. Dixon, Illinois, May 16th, where the student opened fire on classmates practicing for graduation, and SRO Mark Dallas responded and stopped the incident by the shooting assailant. A horrible school shooting in Santa Fe, Texas, where 10 people lost their lives. SROs engaged with the active shooter. This was an absolute gun battle. Noblesville, Indiana on May 25th, where a teacher takes action, assisted by an SRO, and they're able to stop this active shooter. So again, we've seen many instances, unfortunately, I'm having to say this, where SROs have taken action to stop active shooters during this past school year, and I just really want to highlight the work that they've done and appreciate the work that you're doing as SROs. I know that you're making a difference out there. I do want to mention, as I close my part of the presentation, we're looking forward to having Michelle Gay along with us the first week of December, where we'll be hosting a National School Safety Leaders Summit in Baltimore County. And that information is on our website at NASRO.org. We'd love to have you, as well as your administrators, join us there. So thank you so much for the time. I hope my comments have been helpful to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo. So we'll go ahead and just move into a couple of poll questions for the audience, just to kind of get an idea of where folks are coming from and just to see the answers to a couple of questions to follow. Thanks, everyone, for your quick responses. We'll just have another couple seconds. I see a good amount of responses are coming in here. So just a few more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and move on with the presentation. It's looking like many of our audience members do have a full-time SRO assigned to their school. So with that, thank you everyone for taking the time to answer, and we'll go ahead and proceed with the presentation. So Chief Straub, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you everybody for participating. First, I'd like to thank the school resource officers, the school security officers, the campus law enforcement officers that are on and participating in the webinar today. Your work is critically important, as Mo just pointed out. Michelle, thank you for participating, and Mike Kehoe for sharing your experiences and your wisdom, Dean, for your opening remarks, and really the brains behind this operation, Sarah Solano, for all of your hard work, as well as our partners in OJJDP. As some of you know, this is the second in a series of two webinars. The first is available or will be shortly on the OJJDP YouTube site, and I would urge you, if you didn't participate in that one, to watch it. One of the things that we've done at the Police Foundation is create the Center for Mass Violence Response Studies. We did that with the intention of preparing public safety, government, school, private sector, and community leaders to think critically about the challenges associated with preventing, responding to, and recovering from mass casualty events. We believe that mass violence is a phenomena that transcends not just school environments, but as we've seen, occurs in nightclubs, occurs at office holiday parties, occurs in random shootings on the streets in places like Kalamazoo, Michigan, occurs in media outlets, like we saw at the Capitol Gazette shooting. We believe that it is important to conduct objective, policy-relevant research and critical incident reviews. Based on that research, based on those critical incident reviews, based on our Averted School Violence database, we believe that we can provide training and technical assistance to the participants in today's webinar as well as others in public, private, and the community sector. We have, at the Police Foundation, unfortunately conducted in-depth studies of mass violence events. We did a study of the San Bernardino terrorist attack, the Orlando Pulse nightclub attack, the Kalamazoo mass shooting that I mentioned, and now are working with others to review the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School shooting. Those are part of our after-action reviews, and they're all available on the Police Foundation website. Much of the reason for the webinar today and last week was our Averted School Violence initiative. The ASV database, as we call it, is a national initiative funded by the National Institute of Justice and the COPS office at DOJ. The idea is that near-miss events occur much more frequently than completed acts of school violence, thank God. We believe that by studying those events, we have the opportunity to learn, to build a body of knowledge that will help us identify important lessons for the prevention, the response, and the recovery from these events. The database currently houses both averted incidents as well as completed incidents. The database is completely anonymous. They can be reported at asvnearmiss.org. And we would encourage all of you to participate in the database. Again, sharing information about averted attacks, we believe, will give us the ability to do substantial empirical studies and research to improve our ability to prevent these attacks. Currently, we have 2 reports that will be coming out. They're going through the review process at the Department of Justice. One is by Professor Jeff Daniels, in which he examines 51 incidents of averted school attacks. The other is a report prepared by Dr. Peter Langman and myself, where we compare averted attacks and completed attacks, and we hope to have those out in the next couple of months. The other thing before we get to the poll question is for the school resource officers that are on the webinar today. As you know, if you're a NASRO member, we are currently working with NASRO to conduct a survey of crisis intervention training. Also today with our partner Jeff Allison at the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement, we released a similar study. Our idea is to learn about crisis intervention training among school resource officers and campus law enforcement officers with the hope of understanding what that training consists of and how we can work with those organizations and individual schools and members to improve their crisis intervention training, which we think is an essential component in identifying at-risk individuals and then potentially connecting them to services, which we feel is the most appropriate and hopeful way to prevent school violence. So, Sarah, I know you have a poll question up. I'll let you go forward with that.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, we'll go ahead and launch the poll at this point. So as Frank was mentioning, it's really important to share these stories around attacks that have been averted, around what worked well for your school that allowed that attack to be prevented. So if you have such a story and you're willing to share it with us, we would be more than happy to follow up with you as you're, filling out the poll. You're more than welcome to share your story at the URL asvnearmiss.org. And additionally, if you'd be interested in providing additional detail, someone from our project team or subject matter experts will gladly follow up with you personally to get those additional details. So we'll just give a little bit longer for everyone to fill out the poll. thanks everyone for your responses. We're still seeing a couple trickle in. If you are answering yes to this, we'll get your email after the webinar, and we'll follow up in the next couple of days with next steps. And again, we really appreciate if you're able to share your story. It's very valuable, and you have a lot to offer. So with that, thank you, and we'll go ahead and turn it back over to Frank.
And hi, Frank. You may be on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the questions, the poll questions, and for today's conference. We have some time left, so I'll turn it over to William to help guide questions that you may have for the presenters today. And be safe, and thank you very much for all the work you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, and to all the presenters. So at this point, we'll go ahead and take any questions from the audience. If you want to share them in the chat box, we'll go ahead and read them aloud to our presenters, and they'll go ahead and answer accordingly.
And just a reminder to our audience, you can just put your question inside of the chat box. Once you enter in your question in the chat box, we will answer them accordingly. We will give everyone a couple of minutes to ask your question, and thank you all for joining us today. Looks like we have a couple of questions coming in. Thank you all for submitting your questions. Yes, thank you all. Please continue to submit your questions. Thank you all for submitting your questions.
Looks like we had a question come through probably for Mo. So some of the background is that Director Canady, you talked about SROs being informal counselors who often prevent shootings before they even begin by creating good relationships, with others and students who are potentially violent. Is there any opportunity to have the involvement of faculty, parents, and students in programs that train and encourage this kind of informal counseling for SROs?
Yeah, as far as our training is certainly open to school administration and educators and school safety folks. We don't have a component at this point for parents specifically, but as we're working with the Police Foundation on Averted School Violence and we get more of these stories about how this has occurred, we may find more parent involvement and find an outlet to involve parents more in that training aspect. That's a great question.
Thank you, and I see a few more questions coming through. Looks like one of them came for any of our presenters, is if there's any opinion in regards to arming teachers.
Well, this is Mo. While I guess I still kind of have the floor, I'll share where our association is on that. We have been firm in our statement that we believe that every school in this country needs at least one carefully selected and specially trained SRO, and we would hope that we would be able to get to that point as opposed to educators having to be armed. We really would prefer to see that well-trained officer on campus that can handle this kind of an event.
Thanks, Mo. Would any of our other presenters like to share?
This is Michelle from Safe and Sound Schools. I would just like to say we're very much in line with the NASRO's position on having sworn law enforcement officers that are specifically trained as school resource officers in the position of carrying in schools. We understand that even though that's the ideal, it's certainly hard for some of our schools to get there, and that resources are always an issue for our schools. So we understand that it has to be a community-based decision, but we certainly are pushing for the ideal scenario, just like you know, we want to see a school nurse in every school to provide you know, immediate assistance and guidance and education in terms of any types of medical needs that come up during the school day and during the school year, just like we would like to see school-based mental health professionals that are in schools as resources and connectors to mental health services. Just like we have those types of experts in those areas of safety, we certainly would like to see school resource officers in each and every one of our schools to provide you know, assistance in times of crisis, but more importantly, in my estimation, on a day-to-day basis as our resources for safety, for educators, for parents, for students, you know, dealing with everything from bike safety to dating safety to drunk driving, all of those issues that are very much a part of the conversation and the life of our students.
All right, thank you. Looks like we'll have time for about one more question. So I'll go ahead and just pose this to everyone in the group. Are there any stats on violence in tribal schools or Native community public schools that any of our presenters know about? I'll go ahead and just respond to that one a little bit. So in terms of the Averted School Violence database, one of the questions that we ask folks who are sharing their stories is whether or not it occurred in a tribal community. So to date, we, through our system, have not received any reports on that matter, but that's certainly data that we would like to collect moving forward, and that's something that, you know, in the future we would make available to our database. So I'll throw that out there as well. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to William Moore with NTTAC. Thanks, everyone, for all of the questions.
Excellent, and thank you very much, Sarah. And all of our presentees, I went ahead and put up their contact information, but just as a reminder to everyone that you can get access to their contact information via the PowerPoint PDF that is located in the handouts pod. But I'm just want to wrap up just in the last few minutes that we have for our presentation. So again, thank you so much to all of our presenters on that absolutely wonderful and necessary topic and webinar for discussion today. But before we end, I do have just a few brief reminders for everyone. So please be mindful that you may also contact OJJDP NTTAC through the website displayed on the slide here. And you can stay up to date on the latest information by signing up for OJJDP's NTTAC TTA listserv as well. So also don't forget to like us on Facebook at OJJDP TTA. And you can also contact OJJDP via the Help Desk by following the contact information on this slide. And as a reminder for everyone, the webinar recording will be archived in approximately 1 week through OJJDP's YouTube page. And the information on this slide has all of OJJDP's information where you can find us on YouTube to review past webinars. And again, to get access to the transcript or even support materials, please be sure to contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk at OJJDP-TTA@usdoj.gov. Please take a few minutes to review the disclaimer on this slide. And finally, just a reminder to everyone that lastly, we would appreciate if you could take about 5 minutes to complete the feedback survey and provide us feedback so that we can better improve our future webinars and trainings. Again, have a great afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today, and have a wonderful afternoon. Take care. Bye-bye.
The host has left the meeting, so at this time, the meeting will come to an end. Thank you, and goodbye.